Okay, so in the spirit of this being the do whatever the fuck I want channel, let's read a poem because I want to do that now. So there's a post going around that's cropped up for me a couple of times now. For people, someone saying, "Hey, I went reading old Victorian poetry and I found this poem and everyone needs to read it because it's so fucking cool." And then under that, I saw like a bunch of other people going, "Yeah, no, that's a really cool poem. Read this poem. This poem is really awesome. Like, send this poem to the weirdest person you know. They'll love it." And I was like, I'm like moderately odd, right? Like I qualify for that. Like I qualify for the category of at least a little strange, a bit. Like, you know, not the weirdest person, but surely, like if it's for people who are weird, maybe I'll take some level of pleasure in it. So, let us read The Song of the Worm by Eliza Cook, which was written, well, the only date we have for its publication at least was 1869. Nice. Yeah. Let's just do that. Let's just read the poem and then chat about it, I suppose. The worm, the rich worm, has a noble domain in the field that is stored with its millions of slain. The charnel grounds widen, to me they belong, with the vaults of the I always have trouble with this word. Sepulcher, sculptured and strong. God damn it. The Tower of Ages in fragments is laid, moss grows on the stones, and I lurk in its shade. And the hand of the giant and the heart of the brave must turn weak and submit to the worm and the grave. Daughters of earth, if I happen to meet your bloom-plucking fingers and sod-treading feet, oh, turn not away with the shrieks of disgust from the thing you must mate with in darkness and dust. Your eyes may be flashing in pleasure and pride, beneath the crown of a queen or the wreath of a bride. Your lips may be fresh and your cheeks may be fair. Let a few years pass over, and I shall be there. Cities of splendor, where palace and gate, where marble of strength and the purple of state, where the mart and arena, the olive and vine, once flourished in glory, oh, are ye not mine? Go look for famed Carthage, and I shall be found in the desolate ruin and weed-covered mound, and the slime of my trailing discovers my home mid the pillars of Tyre and the temples of Rome. I am sacredly sheltered and daintily fed, where the velvet bedecks and the white lawn is spread. I may feast undisturbed, I may dwell and carouse on the sweetest of lips and the smoothest of brows. The voice of the sexton, the chink of the spade, sound merrily under the willow's dank shade. They are carnival notes, and I travel with glee to learn what the churchyard has given to me. Oh, the worm, the rich worm, has a noble domain, for where monarchs are voiceless, I revel and reign. I delve at my ease and regale where I may. None dispute with the worm in his will or his way. The high and the bright for my feasting must fall. Youth, beauty, and manhood, I pray on ye all. The prince and the peasant, the despot and slave, all must bow down to the worm and the grave. So we have a memento mori here, right? Like, it's essentially the point is, yeah, you're all going to be worm food. Everyone's going to die. Everyone's going to become a corpse. Everyone's going to rot. And the worms will burrow into your skulls and eat your soft brain matter, right? Like, everyone is equal before the scythe of death, essentially, right? But then also, it's like, rather than, like, memento moris can take a lot of forms, right? Like, that it can be, they can be sort of like these grand proclamations of like the terrible power of God, essentially, right? Like that no living creature may like stand before the awesome power of the Lord to determine who shall die and who shall live, like so on. They can be very Christian. They can also be not very Christian. And this one takes an interesting tone because, like, it's like, oh yeah, you know what we're gonna do here? We're not only gonna glorify the worm, which is like the lowliest of creatures, right? Like a filthy worm in the earth. Like, who gives a shit about a worm? Well, the worm gives a shit about you because eventually, by hook or by crook, in some way, shape, or form, that's where you're gonna go. And that's, as it says, it is the thing you must mate with in darkness and dust. Which is an interesting thing, like, mate with, because, like, yeah, the worm will eat of your corpse and use the nutrients it extracts to make more of itself, which is... It is a kind of mating, right? Like, that is a kind of odd intercourse, which, like, if you've been watching the Dungeon Meshi anime or following along with my reactions on this channel, is like, hey, there's a theme that that ties in a little bit to what that anime has on its mind, like this interplay between the concept of being eaten and the concept of, like, being changed and, like, being digested and turned from one thing to another through this process of consumption and change. So, like, there's a lot of memento mori of, like it takes, like, whether you're a queen or a bride, whether you're a tyrant or a slave, youth, beauty, manhood, and it, like, name drops Tyre and Carthage and Rome, like, all these grand and resplendent things. It basically positions them as subservient to the worm, right? Like, all of these things, yeah, like, grand edifices rising over the landscape, all, I'm sure, but ultimately they are the domain of the worm. Like, it's sort of this reversal of putting the worm, which is famously eaten by the early bird, right? Essentially on top of the food chain, right? Like, that this is the master to whom all must bow in the end, right? That we all become a part of the worm at some point, and that the worm is always just waiting, right? The high and the bright for my feasting must fall. Youth, beauty, and manhood, I pray on ye all. The prince and the peasant, the despot and slave, all must bow down to the worm and the grave. Which is like, yeah. But it also has kind of a cheerful vibe, right? Like, it's not... It really isn't morose about it. It's not like a sad poem. It's not like an, oh, like, we're all gonna die and it's gonna suck. It is... Because it's from the perspective of the worm, right? It is sort of this... It's a joyful thing, right? Daughters of the earth, if I happen to meet your bloom-plucking fingers and sod-treading feet, oh, turn not away with a shriek of disgust from the thing you must mate with in darkness and dust. It's humorous, right? Like, it takes a pretty light tone. They're like, yeah, hey, you're gonna die. Don't worry about it. Like, just be fond of the worm. Like, look at the worm and like, adore it a little bit, right? Your lips may be fresh and your cheeks may be fair. Let a few years pass over and I shall be there. Like, essentially, this conceptualizes death as a kiss, right? Like, your lips may be fresh and your cheeks may be fair. Let a few years pass over and I'm gonna be the one kissing those things, right? Like, so it's almost like this little romance, right? Like this delayed flirtation. That the worm is sort of going, well, you say no now. Give it a few years. Like, I'll reel you in yet. It's like almost as though it's a courtship, right? Like, it's like this long courtship of exchanging letters and sighing glances, like courtly love sort of thing. With a marble of strength and the purple of state. I like using purple there, because, like, purple is the imperial color, right? Like, that's sort of the stereotypical thing of, like, yes, the king clad all in purple as a sort of signifier of his wealth and power, because purple used to be one of the rarest dyes in the world, like one of the rarest and most expensive colors you could make, used to be in purple, so it was called imperial purple, because it was so expensive that really only heads of state, emperors, kings, had access to having whole garments that were dyed purple. Like, a noble person could have, like, a handkerchief that was purple, maybe, but an actual, like, a cloak or a cape or like an ermine cloak, something like that, with all dyed in purple, that was like, fucking hell, that's a rich person. That's someone who has power and glory, right? So the marble of strength and the purple of state, with the mart, the and arena, the olive and vine, once flourished in glory. Oh, are ye not mine? Like, again, this slightly wry, cheerful tone, right? Like, oh, all of this once flourished in glory, but don't you belong to me, really? Which, again, I guess depending on how you read it, it sort of has a little bit of that flirtatious thing. Like, oh, hey, kitty cat. My cat has been sick. She has some kind of gastrointestinal something. Like, she's been nauseous, having trouble eating. we've been to the doctor with her. She's been x-rayed and everything, and there doesn't seem to be any problem, just a little bit of gut inflammation, which is just making her a bit miserable. So she's in here in my office with me. Hi, babe. Yeah. Please don't lay down on the keyboard. Not on the keyboard. No. There we go. Anyway, where was I? Right, I am sacredly sheltered and daintily fed. Which is like, sacredly sheltered within the earth, right? Like the earth mother, the universal, like, the earth is sacred, right? And daintily fed, which is like, yeah, like when we put someone in the ground, at least ideally, we're like, oh yeah, put them, like, carefully lower them down, put the dirt on them slowly and sweetly, and like say prayers over them and solemnly, and it's like, so yeah, like that makes sense. Daintily fed, where the velvet bedecks and the white lawn is spread, I may feast undisturbed, I may dwell and carouse on the sweetest of lips, returning to the lips, right? And the smoothest of brows. And the smoothest of brows being, one assumes, the brow of the skull. Picked clean of flesh. The voice of the sexton, the chink of the spade, sound merrily under the willow's dank shade. They are carnival notes, and I travel with glee to learn what the churchyard has given to me. Right? And again, this cheerful reframing of what a funeral is. For us, it's a horrible thing. Like, it's a miserable thing to be at a funeral and see someone be put in the ground, but for the worm, hey. It's a buffet! Boys, they are carnival notes, and I travel with glee. Oh, the worm, the rich worm, has a noble domain, for where monarchs are voiceless, I revel and reign. This is a killer line. This is genuinely a killer line, because, like, yeah, where monarchs are voiceless, like, because the fundamental quality of a king, right, is their ability to command, right, like the power of their voice, like the fact that they give orders, they speak the law, and it is done in their name, right? But where monarchs are voiceless, in the ground, when they're dead, I revel and reign. Like, that's... Ooh. Like, that shit goes pretty fucking hard, honestly. I delve at my ease and regale where I may. None dispute with the worm in his will or his way. The worm as the monarch of the earth, right? Like, literally of the earth, the dirt, but the monarch of the world. The high and the bright for my feasting must fall. Youth, beauty, and manhood, I pray on ye all. Interesting also to say pray. Sort of like, I don't know exactly if the connotation would be. What are you playing with? No, that's a guitar pick. No, please don't. Don't throw it on the ground. Don't throw it on the ground. Sweetie. Aw. Okay. Just keeping an eye on her. I pray on you all, right? Like, where it's not just a thing of like, oh, you die, and then the worm... It's not the passive thing of the worm comes once you are dead anyway, but rather the worm, as this personification of death and decay, preys on these things. Preys on youth, beauty, and manhood specifically, which is like the gendered things that are in this poem are interesting. Because, like, we have this whole sequence which is like this flirtation with the daughters of Earth, right? Like, human beings. Bloom plucking fingers and sod treading feet, and sort of imploring them not to see the worm as something horrible, but to revere it, or love it, or, you know, even be charmed by it. And then all of these things about, like, kings, monarchs, ancient monuments of great civilizations, like that stereotypically is more coded masculine, right? Like you think of Rome, you think of Kaiser, Caesar, right? Perhaps more than of the women who were there. Hi, sweetie, don't step on the hotkey. Don't stop the recording. No, okay, good. She is pretty good generally about not stepping on hotkeys. She stepped on one there, though. Prince and the peasant, the despot and slave, all must bow down to the worm in the grave. There is a certain gendering here, where to women, or to the female sex, the worm is almost like like there's this flirtation thing we talked about, but then to these masculine coded things, or things that, like, depending on how you read it, it's not, doesn't say in the dictionary. It is more of like it's a predator, right? It's more of a, it's like, you think you're so big and powerful, I'll have you. I will have you yet, where it's less sort of flirtatious and cheerful, and a little bit more like, you cannot be greater than I. For in the end, you are my buffet, right? Go look for famed Carthage, and I shall be found in the desolate ruin and weed-covered mound. And the slime of my trailing discovers my home mid the pillars of Tyre and the temples of Rome. Again, like, interesting again with the temples, because it's like, that's a religious angle, which, right, the great temples of Rome, which, would that be sort of an oblique reference perhaps to Catholicism, even? Like, that even, like, the great churches of Rome, the great Catholic churches and all, presumably it's more of a reference to ancient Rome, right? One imagines that it would be more of a reference to ancient Rome, since we're mentioning Carthage. The hand of the giant and the heart of the brave must turn weak and submit to the worm in the grave. The charnel grounds widen, to me they belong, where the vaults of the sepulchre. Yeah, that word, sepulchre. Sepulchre. Sepulchre? Where's the emphasis on that? Sculptured and strong, the tower of ages in fragments is laid, moss grows on the stones, and I lurk in its shade. So there's this connection there, like, with nature, with moss, with weed-covered mounds, nature imagery, which makes maybe a little bit romantic, in sort of like this assertion of the power of nature over all things. Which, again, is like that thing about the memento mori. It could be, memento moris can be these reminders of the power of God, right? Like that God shall judge ye on the last day. And like no one is above the judgment of the Lord, or like no one is above the power of the angel of death. But this is not that. This is no one is above the power of nature. Daughters of earth. Fields. Charnel grounds, moss. Like lots of nature imagery happening here. Weed-covered mounds. Willows' dank shade. Churchyards. Yeah, this is more about the power of nature, I think. The power of the natural world rather than the divine. It has that same reminder of humility before the sublime, right? But here the sublime is the earth. Here the sublime is the worm. Here the sublime is creation itself, and not God. Which, for a poem from 1869, hey, that's cool. Oh, the worm, the rich worm, has a noble domain. Again, glorifying the earth. For where monarchs are voiceless I revel, and still, that's such a fucking killer line. That's like, that goes so fucking hard. Seriously, Eliza Cook, you were fucking Eliza cooking. Yeah, they weren't wrong in that post. This is a good poem. I like it. Anyway, I just wanted to read a poem with you all. So, bye.